Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you a question that cuts to the core of human power. Why do some men and women walk through fire without flinching, while others crumble at the first wind of adversity? The answer lies in a fundamental law of the universe, one understood by every great leader, warrior, and empire builder in history. The world treats you exactly as you train it to treat you. When you wince at insults, you invite more. When you stagger under betrayal, you teach others how to wound you. But when you stand unmoved, when you act as if nothing touches you, you transform yourself into a force that cannot be ignored. The unbreakable mirror principle operates on a fundamental law of human interaction. Every reaction you display teaches the world exactly how to affect you. When someone throws an insult and you wince, you've just handed them a weapon. When betrayal makes you crumble, you've shown your enemies where to strike next. But when you stand unmoved, when your face remains as still as deep water, you send a message far more powerful than any retaliation. This cannot touch me. History's most formidable figures understood this instinctively. Consider the merchant princes of Renaissance Venice, who conducted business with ice in their veins. If a rival spread lies, they didn't waste energy refuting them. They let their next shipment's quality speak for itself. When competitors tried to provoke them into emotional decisions, they responded with calculated silence. Over time, their composure became a psychological moat, one that discouraged future attacks because the attackers received no reward, no satisfaction, not even the petty thrill of seeing their blows land. This principle extends beyond mere stoicism. It's about recognizing that human behavior follows predictable patterns of stimulus and response. When a child learns that tantrums earn attention, the tantrums increase. When a bully discovers his words draw blood, the cruelty escalates. But remove the reaction and the behavior loses its purpose. A lion doesn't chase a gazelle that doesn't run. It conserves energy for prey that still believes in the hunt. In modern warfare, special forces operatives are trained not just in combat, but in the art of non-reaction. During interrogation resistance drills, they learn that the moment they reveal a trigger, a flicker of fear at certain questions, a tell when lying, their opponent gains leverage. But the soldier who maintains utter neutrality, even under torture, becomes an unsolvable puzzle. The interrogator eventually exhausts himself against that wall of stillness. The same dynamic governs business and personal relationships. A CEO who erupts at every critical headline teaches the media they can manipulate her. A parent who yields to a child screaming teaches the child that volume controls outcomes. But those who master the unbreakable mirror principle invert this equation. They understand that most provocations are test probing for weaknesses to exploit. When none are found, the probing stops. This isn't passive acceptance. It's strategic dominance through emotional sovereignty. When Julius Caesar was handed a scroll detailing a conspiracy against him during the Senate, he read it without expression, then tucked it away as if it were a grocery list. His indifference didn't just deny his enemies the spectacle of his fear, it made them question whether their plot had ever mattered at all. Months later, when the conspirators struck, they did so frantically, desperately, already unraved by his prior non-reaction. The principle reaches its zenith in financial markets. Legendary traders like Jesse Livermore knew that panic and euphoria were contagious and fatal. When others sold recklessly during crashes, he trained himself to sit perfectly still, watching for the moment when the herd's hysteria created opportunity. His greatest profits came not from what he did, but from what he refused to do, react. Implementing this requires brutal self-honesty. Every time you feel compelled to respond, to correct a slight, to justify yourself, to counterattack, ask, does this serve my power or theirs? The moment you need others to acknowledge your strength, you've already shown weakness. True authority comes from the quiet certainty that requires no validation. This is why the masters of every age, from samurai to software billionaires, cultivate what the Japanese call heijoshin, ordinary mind. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of such complete control that nothing external can dictate inner state. They grasp the secret. The world mirrors back what you project. Show it disturbance, and disturbance multiplies. Show it unshakable calm, and eventually the storm moves on to easier prey. The training begins in small moments. The next time a driver cuts you off, notice the urge to curse and withhold it. When a colleague takes credit for your idea, observe the heat rising in your chest and let it pass without action. With each exercise, you're not just controlling reactions, you're reprogramming your nervous system to default to sovereignty. Eventually, you'll discover the ultimate liberation, the realization that most attempts to provoke you were never worth acknowledging in the first place. The alchemy of composure begins with the radical truth. The line between pretending and becoming is far thinner than most dare to believe. Every master was first an actor not in the theatrical sense, but in the alchemical one. They understood that repeated behaviors forge new neural pathways, that consistent external composure eventually rewires internal responses. When you adopt the posture of calm daily, the steady hands, the measured speech, the unflinching gaze, your subconscious mind gradually accepts this as your true nature. What begins as conscious performance becomes unconscious competence. Consider the transformation of ancient warriors through ritual. Spartan boys taken for a Goj training didn't initially possess legendary discipline. They mimicked it until it became second nature. Their instructors knew a profound psychological secret. The body shapes the mind as much as the mind shapes the body. By maintaining perfect posture during floggings, by chanting verses while marching barefoot through snow, they weren't just building endurance, they were programming their nervous systems to associate hardship with absolute self-control. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient wisdom. Studies on power posing reveal that holding dominant physical positions for just 2 minutes alters testosterone and cortisol levels, literally changing one's biochemical state. The implications are staggering. You can chemically engineer confidence through deliberate physicality. This alchemical process extends beyond mere body language. Every time you respond to provocation with calculated stillness instead of reflexive anger, you're performing emotional melody, transform these reactions into golden self-possession. A Wall Street trader once confessed his secret for surviving market crashes. He practiced his panic face in the mirror until he could maintain perfect neutrality during actual disasters. At first, this felt absurd, a grown man rehearsing facial expressions. But when the 2008 crisis hit, while competitors vomited in restrooms, his body automatically defaulted to its trained response. His hands didn't shake because they'd been conditioned not to. The mountain doctrine embodies nature's most timeless lesson in power dynamics. Mountains don't negotiate with storms, debate with earthquakes, or petition avalanches for better treatment. Their strength lies in their monumental indifference and implacable presence that outlasts every temporary disturbance. Human mastery mirrors this geological wisdom. When you refuse to engage with pettiness, you achieve something far more devastating than victory. You make your adversaries irrelevant. History's greatest strategists applied this principle with mathematical precision. During the Warring States period, Chinese General Han Xin demonstrated its power when confronted by a local bully demanding he crawl between the man's legs. Rather than fight, which would have wasted energy on an insignificant foe, Han Xin complied without expression, then continued walking. His contemporaries mocked him until years later, when that same disciplined indifference allowed him to conquer kingdoms they couldn't. The bully became a footnote. Han Xin became legend. Modern psychological warfare confirms the doctrine's potency. FB hostage negotiators are trained that during confrontations, the first person to show emotional investment loses leverage. This explains why skilled negotiators often respond to threats with silence or sudden subject changes, not from evasion, but from strategic non-engagement. The moment you acknowledge unimportant attacks, you've already ceded ground. The mountain doctrine's true brilliance lies in its compound interest. Each time you successfully ignore provocation, you bank psychological capital. Like compound interest, these small deposits of discipline accumulate into unshakable authority. A Silicon Valley CEO applied this by instituting a 24-hour rule, no responding to any criticism until a full day had passed. 90% of emergencies resolved themselves without his involvement, and those requiring response received laser-focused solutions rather than emotional reactions. His competitors, constantly putting out fires, never understood why his company seemed to glide past every industry crisis untouched. Implementation requires ruthless prioritization. Most disturbances fall into three categories: meaningful threats requiring strategic response, tests probing for weakness, and meaningless noise. Masters develop sixth senses for distinguishing them, like chess grandmasters who instantly recognize which pieces demand attention. The beginner exhausts himself reacting to every move. The expert conserves energy for decisive actions. This selective engagement creates a powerful psychological aura. When people observe that certain tactics consistently fail to provoke you, they abandon them entirely. Your very presence begins to edit others' behavior before any interaction occurs, the ultimate demonstration of silent authority. The mountain doesn't stop the storm from coming, it simply endures while the storm exhausts itself against unyielding stone. The silence of strategic response reveals one of history's most guarded power principles. What you don't say often carries more weight than what you do. Ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu's of that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, a feat achieved not through brute force, but through the psychological dominance of measured silence. When you withhold immediate reaction, you accomplish three critical objectives simultaneously. You deny your opponent the satisfaction of seeing your hand, you create space for strategic clarity to emerge, and you instill doubt in those who expected predictable resistance. Consider the case of a prominent tech executive who faced a very public smear campaign from a rival company. While his board demanded immediate counterattacks and his PR team drafted scathing press releases, he mandated absolute silence. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence of a chess master observing an opponent's reckless opening moves. As weeks passed without response, the rival company's accusations grew increasingly shrill and unfocused, eventually attracting media scrutiny to their own questionable practices. When the executive finally spoke 3 months later at an industry conference, he didn't address the accusations at all. Instead, he unveiled revolutionary technology that made the entire controversy irrelevant. His competitors had been fighting yesterday's battle while he was already shaping tomorrow's landscape. This is the power of disciplined silence. It allows you to redefine the terms of engagement entirely. The physiology of unshakable presence operates on a biological truth few leverage. Your mental state follows your physical condition. Navy SEALs undergoing Hell Week training don't survive through sheer willpower alone. They're taught specific physiological techniques to override panic responses. When submerged in icy water, deprived of sleep for days, they implement tactical breathing, a 4 through the nose, 4-count exhale through pursed lips. This isn't psychological trickery, it's biohacking the autonomic nervous system. The moment your respiratory rate drops below 6 breaths per minute, you trigger parasympathetic dominance, chemically suppressing cortisol and adrenaline production. Your hands steady, your vision sharpens, and your mind clears, not because you've calmed down emotionally, but because you physically reconfigured your stress biochemistry. This principle explains why the world's most effective leaders share certain physical habits. Winston Churchill maintained his legendary composure during the Blitzkrieg by religiously observing his afternoon nap, a practice modern sleep science confirms as critical for emotional regulation. Angela Merkel's famous Stilomat, quiet power, stemmed partly from her background. A quantum chemist, she understood that maintaining low body temperature through controlled environments and measured movements literally cools emotional responses. These aren't personality quirks, but calculated physiological strategies. When you control your body's responses, you don't need to control your emotions. They become naturally aligned with your physical state. The architecture of selective attention functions as the mental equivalent of a castle's murder holes, those strategically placed openings in medieval fortifications that allowed defenders to focus their efforts where attacks were most threatening. Modern cognitive science confirms what ancient warriors knew instinctively: attention is the most finite and therefore most precious resource in any conflict. Every moment you spend processing unimportant information is a moment stolen from strategic thinking. The master doesn't ignore problems, they engineer their perception to automatically filter distractions before conscious thought is required. Elite aids demonstrate this principle perfectly. A championship boxer doesn't see punches coming, his trained perception filters everything except the three most dangerous angles of attack in his opponent's stance. A grandmaster chess player's eyes don't wander across all pieces, they're magnetically drawn to the 4 or 5 squares where the game will be decided. This isn't innate talent but trained perceptual architecture. In business contexts, Warren Buffett's famous two-list strategy, where he forces executives to identify and focus exclusively on their top 5 priorities while avoiding the next 20, completely embodies the same principle. The power lies not in what you focus on, but in what you've systematically trained yourself to disregard. The practical implementation of these 3 principles creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Physiological control provides the foundation for strategic silence, which preserves mental energy for selective attention, which makes physiological control easier to maintain. This isn't philosophy, it's the operating system of history's most formidable minds, now validated by modern neuroscience and behavioral psychology. The path to mastering them begins not with grand gestures, not with daily minutes, 5 minutes of tactical breathing each morning, a 30-second pause before responding to communication, the nightly ritual of physically writing down and destroying the day's unimportant distractions. Small disciplines, repeated consistently, engineer the automatic responses that make composure not something you do, but something you are. The power of emotional transmutation operates on the alchemical principle that base metals can be transformed into gold not through suppression, but through redirection of their essential energy. Every master strategist understands that raw emotion is neither good nor bad. It is simply potential energy waiting to be converted into purposeful action. Anger becomes focus, fear becomes preparation, betrayal becomes strategic clarity. The ancient samurai called this mizu no kokoro, mind like water, where disturbances on the surface don't disrupt the depths, but rather become information about the wind's direction. Consider the case of a Fortune 500 CEO who discovered her longtime partner was embezzling funds. Where others might have erupted in rage or collapsed in despair, she treated the betrayal as valuable market intelligence. It revealed a flaw in her oversight systems. She quietly gathered evidence while maintaining normal operations, then used the incident to completely restructure her company's financial controls. 2 years later, the strengthened systems allowed her to survive an industry downturn that bankrupted competitors. This is emotional alchemy at its highest level, taking what appears as poison and distilling it into medicine. The process requires 3 precise steps. First, complete acknowledgement of the emotion without judgment. Second, a deliberate pause to examine its energetic properties. Third, conscious redirection toward a strategic objective. The strategy of reverse psychology flips conventional wisdom on its head by recognizing that sometimes the most direct path to victory is apparent retreat. Sun Tzu's observation that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting finds its modern expression in psychological judo, using an opponent's momentum against them. When a prominent Silicon Valley founder faced a hostile takeover attempt, he didn't mount an aggressive defense. Instead, he publicly welcomed the acquisition, even suggesting areas where the acquiring company could find hidden value. His enthusiasm triggered their suspicion. They began second-guessing their own analysis and eventually withdrew their offer at significant cost to themselves. This approach works because it exploits fundamental human psychology. People trust what they discover for themselves far more than what's forced upon them. The ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes demonstrated this when Alexander the Great asked what he could do for him. "Stand out of my sunlight," replied the philosopher, a response that both revealed Alexander's unspoken desire for validation and cleverly denied it. Modern negotiators use variations of this technique daily. The car salesman who suggests the expensive model might be too much car for you. The lawyer who reluctantly admits her client might consider settling. The key lies in making your desired outcome appear as the other party's idea while maintaining absolute control of the underlying dynamics. The principle of controlled exposure functions like a psychological vaccination program. Small, measured doses of adversity build immunity to larger attacks. Special Forces units trained this way deliberately, exposing soldiers to gradually increasing levels of stress until they can maintain cognitive function under what would break ordinary individuals. A Wall Street trader turned this into an art form by deliberately placing small losing trades, earning it to sting out, conditioning himself to handle larger losses without emotional disruption when they inevitably came. The neurological basis for this is well established. Repeated exposure to controlled stressors increases the brain's production of GABA, the neurotransmitter responsible for calming neural activity. This explains why veterans of multiple market crashes often perform better during crises than newcomers, not because they're smarter, but because their neural pathways have been conditioned to default to calm. The practical application is systematic desensitization. If public speaking terrifies you, begin by speaking to small groups of friends, then slightly larger groups, then strangers. Each successful experience rewires your brain's threat assessment mechanisms. The doctrine of strategic patience recognizes that time is the ultimate eye of the disciplined mind. In nature, bamboo spends years developing its root system underground before exploding into rapid growth, sometimes as much as 3 feet in a single day. Human mastery follows the same pattern. When the founders of a now dominant tech startup were laughed out of early investor meetings, they didn't pivot or panic. They continued refining their product in obscurity for 18 months until market conditions shifted, and suddenly their unviable solution became the industry standard. This approach requires understanding the difference between inactivity and preparation. The samurai Miyamoto Musashi would sometimes spend entire duels standing completely still, not from hesitation, but because he was waiting for one specific opening that would guarantee victory. Modern research confirms the power of this approach. Studies of elite athletes show the best performers aren't those who react quickest, but those who wait longest before committing to the optimal response. The key is maintaining what Special Forces call relaxed readiness, a state where you're fully prepared to act, but not emotionally invested in acting prematurely. Together, these 4 principles form an interlocking system for mastering any high-stakes environment. Emotional transmutation provides the fuel, reverse psychology, the tactics, controlled exposure, the conditioning, and strategics, the timing mechanism. The common thread is the recognition that true power comes not from controlling external events, but from engineering internal responses so thoroughly that external events lose their ability to disturb. Ancient warriors spent years mastering these disciplines through ritualized practice. Modern achievers can accelerate the process through deliberate cognitive conditioning, but the fundamental principles remain unchanged across centuries. The path begins with a single realization: every attempt to provoke you is an opportunity to demonstrate who you really are. The paradox of detached engagement forms the cornerstone of elite performance across all high-stakes domains. This counterintuitive principle demands complete immersion in the present moment while maintaining absolute emotional distance from outcomes. Ancient Greek archers embodied this perfectly. They trained to focus solely on the perfection of their release, knowing the wind might still carry the arrow off course. Modern brain scans reveal why this works. When subjects concentrate purely on process rather than results, their prefrontal cortex shows optimization patterns for performance while stress centers remain quiet. A championship poker player demonstrated this by winning 3 consecutive World Series bracelets through what he called playing each hand as if it exists in isolation. After folding a losing hand, he would physically shake out his arms and take 3 deliberate breaths, a ritual that neurologically reset his brain to zero emotional baggage before the next deal. The technique appears simple, but its power is profound by caring deeply about your actions while remaining indifferent to immediate consequences. You create a psychological position where nothing can rattle you because you're always playing the long game. The velocity of decided action operates on the principle that speed alone cannot compensate for poor direction, but perfect timing married to absolute commitment creates unstoppable momentum. Napoleon's battlefield successes stem not from larger armies, but from his ability to make quicker, more determined decisions than his opponents, what he called the force multiplier of rapidity. Contemporary studies of emergency room doctors reveal a similar pattern. The most effective practitioners aren't those who act fastest, but those who reach decisions fastest and then execute with total conviction. A hedge fund manager who consistently outperforms markets applies this through what he terms the 70% rule. Once he has 70% of the information needed for a good decision, he acts with complete commitment rather than waiting for certainty. The neurological advantage is clear. Hesitation creates cognitive drag that clouds judgment, while decisive action creates a positive feedback loop of confidence. This isn't recklessness, it's the recognition that perfect opportunities don't exist, and that the mental cost of delayed decisions often exceeds the financial cost of occasional errors. The economy of attention represents perhaps the most scarce resource in the modern world, the ability to focus only on what truly matters. Renaissance polymath Leonardo da Vinci maintained his extraordinary creativity through what he called disciplined disinterest, ruthlessly ignoring trivial matters to conserve mental energy for breakthroughs. Modern neuroscience confirms his intuition. Each time we switch tasks, we incur what's called an attention residue penalty that can last up to 20 minutes. A Silicon Valley CEO implements this by dividing his day into creator blocks, 4-hour uninterrupted stretches, and manager blocks, batched meetings and emails. His rule is simple but transformative. When creating, nothing exists but the work. When managing, nothing exists but the person before me. The results of speak-built theory dollar companies while working fewer hours than his peers. This principle goes beyond time management. It's about understanding that mental bandwidth is finite and that every unnecessary thought you entertain is stolen from your highest priorities. The discipline of strategic withdrawal flies in the face of conventional never quit wisdom by recognizing that temporary retreat often enables ultimate victory. When the Mongol armies faced impregnable fortresses, they would sometimes pretend to flee in disorder only to return when defenders dropped their guard. Modern business strategy confirms the value of this approach. Companies that make strategic exits from declining markets free up resources to dominate emerging ones. A legendary venture capitalist applies this through his 90-day test. If a portfolio company hasn't met key milestones after 3 months of intense effort, he withdraws all support. His reasoning is brutally pragmatic. Better to lose $1 million now than $10 million later. The psychological brilliance lies in pre-committing to exit criteria, removing emotion from the decision in the heat of battle. This isn't defeatism. It's the recognition that persistence without wisdom is just stubbornness, and that sometimes the most powerful move is stepping back to regain perspective. The architecture of routine serves as the invisible scaffolding for exceptional performance. Ancient Roman legions conquered the known world not through individual brilliance, but through unrelenting adherence to standardized procedures, from how they built camps to how they marched. Contemporary research on habit formation reveals why this works. When behaviors become automatic through repetition, they bypass the prefrontal cortex and run on mental autopilot, conserving willpower for critical decisions. A world-renowned concert pianist maintains her edge through what she calls non-negotiable fundamentals, 2 hours of scales and arpeggios every morning before tackling repertoire. Her insight is profound. The routine isn't the obstacle to my artistry, it's the foundation that makes artistry possible. This principle transforms discipline from something you exert to something you inhabit. The difference between forcing yourself to practice and becoming someone for whom practice is as natural as breathing. The key lies in designing rituals so precisely that they become identity rather than obligation. The mastery of contextual awareness separates true strategists from mere tacticians. This principle involves developing a sixth sense for the invisible forces shaping any situation, the cultural undercurrents, power dynamics, and unspoken rules that dictate outcomes before visible actions even begin. Ancient Chinese military advisors called this reading the cue of the battlefield, observing subtle signs like bird flight patterns or dust clouds to predict enemy movements. Modern intelligence analysts use similar techniques when tracking financial flows or social media sentiment shifts. A corporate turnaround specialist applies this by spending his first week at failing companies not reviewing spreadsheets, but observing lunchroom interactions and parking lot hierarchies. His most valuable intelligence comes from noting which departments cluster together, who arrives early, and which memos go unread, revealing the real organizational structure that exists beneath the official one. The neurological basis for this skill lies in trained pattern recognition. Experts literally see different details than novices because their brains have learned what to filter and what to amplify. You cultivate this by practicing wide-angle attention, regularly stepping back to absorb the entire ecosystem surrounding your immediate focus, looking for connections and contradictions others miss. The principle of antifragile systems goes beyond resilience. It describes things that actually improve under stress and volatility. The human immune system operates this way, strengthening through controlled exposure to pathogens. Ancient shipbuilders demonstrated this wisdom by constructing vessels with flexible joints that became more seaworthy as waves battered them. A hedge fund manager built his fortune on this concept, deliberately creating an investment portfolio that profits from market chaos through carefully designed counterpositions. His insight was revolutionary. Don't just survive storms, engineer your position so storms make you stronger. Modern complexity science confirms this approach. Systems with the right degree of stress, exposure, and recovery cycles don't merely endure, they evolve. You apply this by identifying pressure points in your life or business where controlled stressors can produce disproportionate growth, much like muscles breaking down and rebuilding stronger after exercise. The key lies in precise calibration. Too little challenge creates stagnation. Too much causes breakdown. Those who master this principle stop fearing chaos and start cultivating it selectively, like blacksmiths using carefully measured hammer blows to forge unbreakable steel. The strategy of multiple horizons solves the classic dilemma, balancing immediate needs with long-term vision by operating simultaneously across different time frames. Medieval cathedral builders exemplified this, laying foundations for structures they knew wouldn't be completed in their lifetimes, while also achieving smaller milestones to maintain momentum. A tech visionary who accurately predicted 3 major industry shifts attributes his foresight to maintaining telescopes, binoculoscopy, and micros constantly scanning for decade-level trends, 3-year opportunities, and immediate experiments. His research team dedicates 70% of resources to current products, 20% to emerging technologies, and 10% to moonshot ideas with no apparent commercial application. This approach mirrors the investment strategies of ancient merchant families who balance quick-turn trades, mid-term ventures, and generational legacy projects. The psychological power lies in escaping the tyranny of either, or thinking you're not sacrificing today for tomorrow or vice versa, but rather integrating different time perspectives into a cohesive whole. Implement this by dividing your priorities into 3 distinct time buckets, ensuring each receives dedicated attention rather than competing for the same mental space. The discipline of controlled deprivation harnesses the paradoxical power of voluntary constraints to generate breakthrough creativity and resilience. Buddhist monks have long used fasting and silence to achieve heightened awareness, while ancient Greek athletes followed strict ascetic regimens before competitions. A Pulitzer-winning author still writes all first drafts with a manual typewriter in a windowless cabin, deliberately removing digital distractions to force deeper concentration. Modern neuroscience explains why this works. Sensory deprivation and controlled hardship trigger neurogenesis, the growth of new brain cells, and enhance cognitive flexibility. Special Forces units apply this through stress exposure training, where candidates endure carefully calibrated hardships to expand their performance envelope. The key insight is that strategic subtraction often enables multiplicative gains. By removing options, you paradoxically increase focus and innovation. Apply this principle by identifying one area where comfortable abundance might be limiting your potential, then designing temporary, deliberate constraints to break habitual thinking patterns. The most powerful constraints are often temporal, strict deadlines, sensory, removing visual inputs, or tool-based, limiting technology. The power of oblique approaches recognizes that some objectives can only be achieved by seemingly unrelated means, like ancient mathematicians solving geometry problems through algebraic methods. Military history's greatest flanking maneuvers demonstrate this, where victory came not from attacking strong points, but from appearing where least expected. A pharmaceutical company recently cured a stubborn disease not by targeting the illness directly, but by researching an entirely different biological mechanism that incidentally solved their original problem. The CEO called it innovation through peripheral vision. Cognitive scientists describe this as lateral thinking, solving problems through indirect creativity rather than linear logic. You cultivate this skill by practicing analogy thinking regularly, asking what unrelated field might hold the solution to this challenge, and deliberately exposing yourself to domains far outside your specialty. The most elegant solutions often emerge when you stop charging at problems head on and instead circle them, looking for unexpected points of leverage. Like water finding cracks in stone, oblique strategies often achieve what direct force cannot. The philosophy of constructive destruction embraces the necessary role of elimination in all meaningful growth. Renaissance artists understood this when they scraped away entire sections of frescoes to perfect a single figure, what they called the courage of the knight. A legendary venture capitalist applies this through his annual purge every December. He eliminates 1/3 of his investments, regardless of performance, to maintain portfolio focus. His reasoning is brutally simple: holding mediocre opportunities blocks space for exceptional ones. Modern systems theory confirms this approach. All healthy systems require periodic pruning to prevent stagnation. Japanese forest managers practice sanbai mori, deliberately cutting down healthy trees to improve the overall ecosystem. Apply this principle by instituting regular review cycles where you eliminate good but not great commitments, relationships, or processes to create space for transformative opportunities. The key lies in distinguishing between destructive loss and constructive removal. One happens to you, the other is consciously chosen. Those who master this principle stop clinging to what exists and develop the discernment to remove anything that no longer serves their highest purpose, creating fertile ground for reinvention. The ultimate measure of strength is not avoiding storms, but remaining unshaken within them. The world will test you, betrayals will come, plans will collapse, pressures will mount. But a trained mind does not falter, it adapts, it persists, it transforms obstacles into stepping stones. Mastery begins the moment you choose not to react, but to respond with clarity, with purpose, with unshakable calm. This is not passive acceptance. This is command. The storm will come. Will you be the one who fears it or the one who commands it?